Eric Salahub here, back for part 6, the last part of why we lecture and why we shouldn't. And so on part 5, I left you with a challenge to come up with a takeaway, a goal for yourself, something that you want to achieve related to anything that you've heard or thought about. And if you didn't come up with something good, but you know you want to do something, this is the part where I'm going to give you some advice on if you want to move forward, what could you do? And let's see if I can actually get my slides to forward here. So maybe lectures are in your past. I'm sure they are. Very likely lectures are in your present. And even if you have started to move away from lecture, if you're like me, you still have room to move even further. So what does this future look like? There are two paradigms, and as we've been talking about, the heart of the dragon, the lecture, is the hallmark trait of this knowledge transmission paradigm. If the goal is to transmit facts and content and topics and the associated skills to students, and it's the job of the teacher as the content expert, the sage on the stage, who has this important information that students don't have, and if they can't get it any other way, or if they won't get it any other way, then we have to transmit it to students, and their job is to take it, learn it, take notes. If we want to move away from lectures, it's probably because we were convinced about the criticisms of lecture as a good way to drive teaching or learning. And so how do we become the course facilitator or the course designer and the learning facilitator? Some ideas for you. Well, when it comes to a paradigm, you've got to be in one or the other. You can't go halfway. A paradigm is this all-encompassing worldview. It's a holistic way of seeing things, and I hope I've done a good enough job over the last close to 90 minutes in 6 parts of this presentation, painting a picture of how the transmission of knowledge paradigm really is a holistic paradigm that includes teachers and students and institutions and classrooms and everything else about the way we think about teaching and learning. You can certainly be a member of the current knowledge transmission paradigm and do some active learning, right? You're sprinkling on some active learning stuff on top of your lecture, and certainly that's better than lecturing all the time. I'm going to encourage you to jump over to the active learning paradigm and be bad at it. You have spent a lot of your career and most of your life learning to become inculcated into the knowledge transmission paradigm. From the time you were sitting watching Sesame Street and it was transmitting knowledge to you through kindergarten, through grade school, middle school, and all the way through your PhD, assuming you have one, or MA, or whatever you have, you've been a part of this paradigm. You're good at it. You know your role. You know the student's role. We're all good at it. And you've probably devoted a lot of your teaching time crafting your skills as a sage on the stage. You're not going to be good as a learner facilitator and a course designer right away. But I think it's worth the challenge to jump to this new paradigm and not be so good at it. I think your students will still learn more. And guess what? You're still going to lecture some too, probably. So how do you move away from lecturing? How do you start moving to this new paradigm? It's about planning and designing. That picture there, that's a rut on the Oregon Trail. My sense is that rut is going to be there for a long time. I'm trying to evoke a metaphor for the knowledge transmission paradigm. This is the way I feel. Every time I quit actively thinking about being a learner facilitator, I fall back into my rut of lecturing. And so if you want to move away from the rut, you're going to have to work really hard and you're going to have a plan, because as soon as you don't have a plan, it's going to be so easy. Your students are going to pull you back. You're going to pull yourself back into lecturing. And so plan and design. Come up with a plan for something you want to do that's not lecturing and stick to it. And I'll just point out that this isn't easy. When we run the Active Learning Institute for an entire semester, we spend one of our sessions talking about lecturing. and 8 other sessions talking about other things related to active learning design. And then we actually redesign a class. And even then, it's hard. So I am not pretending that this is easy, and I'm encouraging you to take a risk and try something new, realizing that you're probably going to fall back into this rut very often. Tell your students why. They expect lectures, maybe they think they like it, maybe they even think lectures help them learn, because students aren't good at perceiving what's helping them learn and not. Tell them why that you're going to make them work hard. Tell them why you're going to ask them to do a quiz to mastery. Tell them why they really need to read the content and study it at home. Letting them behind the curtain is telling them that you have a plan and they're going to work hard, but that you have a rationale and it's based on the science of learning and how they learn. They're still going to struggle, but as long as they know that you have a reason, I think they'll come along with you. That has been my experience and the experience of more than 50 of your colleagues who have gone through the Active Learning Institute. They don't get a lot of pushback because they have convinced their students that they have a plan and that all the things they're doing are there for a reason. Find mentors and supporters on your campus. It's lonely if you're the only one trying it. And so there are other people doing this. Find someone who you can talk to, who you can get reassurance from. Reach out to your instructional coaches. Don't give in, don't give up. Change is hard. It's hard for you, it's hard for your students. And so just know that getting rid of old habits is difficult. Forming new habits is difficult. So focus on student learning. Focus on the students, focus on how to best help them learn. And so when you're thinking about designing a class, think about how can you design experiences and activities for students which allow them to practice the skills using the content that they need that are relevant for your class. And again, these are just going to be a few ideas for you, and I'm going to encourage you to reach out to me or your instructional coaches. Come back for future presentations on backwards design and other things that might help you do this planning more thoroughly. Well, here's one thing anyone can do. Just stop lecturing once in a while. This is a fancy term, the punctuated lecture. Just stop once in a while. Stop as often as you can and ask students to do things like, are you paying attention? What are you doing right now? Do you have a question? Have them write something down. Have them take out a note card. All kinds of things you might do if you just stop lecturing for a minute. And don't just ask students to do something, make them do something. We love teachable moments. The problem is lectures don't provide very many of them. You know, this teachable moment is this kind of mysterious, ephemeral thing. It happens just seemingly out of thin air where students are ready to learn and we're right there ready to help them learn. And teachable moments happen often when students are struggling or trying and they're stuck, they've made a mistake, or they're surprised, or a new phrase that I have learned, they have expectation failure. So thanks, John Manley, for pointing that out to me. Something happens in their brain where they're ready for you to help them, to push them further, to give them feedback about why they're wrong, to point them in the right direction, to encourage them to keep struggling. And I'm going to call this formative feedback, right? The teachable moment happens in that moment of learning. And so if you want those teachable moments, if you want that chance to actually witness your students in that moment of learning, when you have an opportunity to intervene, we have to design those activities, right? We have to design those chances unless we just want to wait for them to spontaneously occur. Think about everything you do as a setup. Students are doing homework, or I'm going to call it pre-work, as a setup to come to class and do something, right? I mean, that's what's going to convince them to actually do the work, because they know that they need to do the work so that when they get to class, they can actually do the activity that you want them to do. And I'll just give you an example. Next week, my students are doing a peer review. Well, if they don't do the pre-work and write a draft, then we can't do the peer review. The pre-work is a setup to come to class and do the draft. And guess what? The peer review of their drafts is a setup for them to go home and do a second draft. And so one tip is just to think about your entire class this way. Everything should be there for a reason. Every activity, every homework, students should realize why they're doing it, how it's connected with the course content and outcomes, and that they should feel like I'm doing this because I need to, because it's a part of this process. I think what you want to aim for, that teachable moment, is what I'm going to call just-in-time teaching. This is a lecture often. You have looked at students' pre-work and realized that, yeah, they eventually quizzed a mastery, but it took them 8 tries to get questions 2 and 7. And so that's where you need to focus your lecture. And maybe you're even going to bring up some of the mistakes they made. You know exactly what you need to talk about. It's not everything. Just-in-time teaching is capturing that teachable moment. It's setting students up to need you to be that expert. It's not the canned lecture that you didn't know if they needed because maybe they did their homework. This is what they need in the moment, and it will tax you more than creating a lecture. I've seen people do this, right? I mean, some of the best teachers here, they do this so expertly. They're in class watching an activity, and based on what is happening in the class in the moment, they're responding with the content and the questions and whatever students need. I mean, this is actually a way to elevate yourself as a teacher, but it can only happen if you're allowing students and forcing them to do the work. You can just get students to cover the content. This is actually one of our nursing colleagues, and those are some of her students, and I think I've blurred things sufficiently. Nursing lectures are long, they're 2 or 3 hours, and students have multiple lectures, and things move really quickly, and there's a ton of content in nursing, and it's extremely important content. They absolutely have to know that stuff. But lecturing for 3 hours is simply not a good way for students to learn content. And so I loved this class that I was in because every student was engaged. The students had done pre-work, they had watched online videos, and they came to class, and then they had a set of prompts, and student groups went up to the board, and they were generating content. And the audience, they weren't just passively looking, they were watching and vetting and giving suggestions, and then switching, and different groups would go to the front. And what's the teacher doing? She was facilitating learning. She was walking around in the crowd up front, looking at what they were doing, posing questions, pushing them further, pointing out possible errors. She was walking out to the people who weren't up at the board, seeing what they were doing, asking, talking. It was an awesome class. All the content got covered, but the students were doing the work. Dr. Mazur, what he calls himself now is someone who does peer instruction. I mean, I've watched him in YouTube. He still lectures, but he does just-in-time teaching. He teaches in a big, quote-unquote, lecture hall. And so he has his students have clickers. He poses problems. He has them try to come up with an answer. He puts them in groups, has them debate the answer if most of them don't get it right. And then he has them struggle in groups and try again. And they struggle again and try again. And then, after they've struggled sufficiently but not too long, then he's going to jump in and do a just-in-time lecture. He doesn't call it a lecture, but that's what I'm going to call it. You could do something like a Frayer Model, where you're going to get students to do something, work in groups, present out, see what they know, try to work, think in class, and then based on what they do, you can fill in the blanks, push them further. And I'm only offering a Frayer Model because it's just one example. There are innumerable kinds of things you could do in class. If you want ideas, Classroom Assessment Techniques, a book that's around a lot. There's copies on campus. You could do Google searches for activities. There's tons of ideas for in-class activities, or reach out to me or any instructional coach. And I just wanted to point out, if you want to read kind of a different take on some of the stuff that I talked about, Donald Bly's What's the Use of Lectures? It's a really good read. But I would highly suggest Graham Gibbs' 20 Terrible Reasons for Lectures, which you can get for free online. Originally written in 1981, updated fairly recently. And I'm going to close out part 6. please, I think what I would really love you to do is send me an email and let me know, what are you going to do with all this content that I just transmitted to you. If you want to remember more than 5 or 10% of all of this stuff that you just spent the last 90 minutes, quote unquote, learning, you're going to need to do something with it. And so, again, let me help you hold yourself accountable to actually do something meaningful by emailing me and letting me know what goal you have, and I'll help you get there. Thank you very, very much for participating in this trial of a 6-part online lecture. Again, this is Eric Salahub, everyone, philosophy faculty instructional coach, signing off.